I'm here for one reason only, to make you money.
If money talks,
You do like making money, correct?
They say what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Ha, money talks.
Welcome to Las Vegas.
CNBC Prime, September 10th.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to On the Money. I'm Maria Bartiromo. This week, my conversation with Wall Street legend Byron Wien. We'll talk jobs, the Fed, and where he thinks the markets go next. The eyes of the world focus on Syria, meanwhile, and the potential of U.S. airstrikes there. Former Defense Secretary William Cohen with me on what may be a lose-lose situation. And then she went from the Hooters girl to the top job at Cinnabon, building a brand, building a career, and the remarkable story of one woman's unusual rise in the corporate world. On the Money begins right now.
This is America's #1 financial news program, On the Money. Now, Maria Bartiromo.
Here's a look at what's making news as we head into a new week on the money. A mixed report card when it comes to America's employment. The Labor Department reporting that the economy created 169,000 new jobs in the month of August. That was slightly below expectations. The unemployment rate still fell to 7.3%, the lowest since December of 2008. But the decline came mostly because fewer Americans are actually looking for work. The number of jobs created for the previous 2 months also revised downward as well. The holiday-shortened week saw light volume this week. The Dow up 90 points on Wednesday on strong auto sales. The S&P 500 and the Nasdaq having their best day in almost 2 weeks. U.S. auto sales are still speeding up. They had their best month in nearly 6 years in August. General Motors saw sales up 15%. Toyota up 23%, both above analyst expectations. Ford and Chrysler were each up 12%. Meanwhile, big news in telecom and tech. Microsoft went shopping and came home with a phone company of its own. The software giant acquiring Finnish company Nokia's handset business for $7.25 billion. That wasn't the only big deal in the mobile world. Verizon acquired Vodafone's 45% stake in Verizon Wireless for $130 billion in cash and stock. Huge deal. The deal is the third largest merger and acquisition transaction ever. The markets had been waiting and watching for the jobs report. Mix in a little Fed speculation, some Syria worries, and we've got an interesting recipe for the week. Joining me now to help interpret it all is Byron Wien. He's vice chairman of the Blackstone Advisory Group. Byron, good to have you on the program.
Great to be here.
Thank you so much for joining me. We got the jobs report out on Friday. The economy creating 169,000 new jobs. That was below expectations.
Well,
how would you characterize?
I would say it was disappointing, and the revisions were disappointing. The economy, you know, the more recent numbers, the Purchasing Manager Index, some of the other numbers, the revision of the GDP for the second quarter, those were all favorable. So people were thinking the economy has been developing more momentum. This is a refutation of that.
Now, I think one of the more interesting points that a lot of people mentioned was the fact that the participation rate in the jobs market has fallen to like 30-plus year low.
62 handle, yeah.
So what does that mean? That, in other words, people have stopped looking. They're not participating in the jobs market.
Right. People have given up. You know, it's too frustrating to look for a job. They send out hundreds of resumes. They get few interviews, and no jobs come from it.
Do you think this number on Friday will sway policymakers in the Fed? The next Federal Reserve meeting, September 17th and 18th, that's the two-day meeting. A lot of people thought that was the meeting that the Fed would say, we are going to begin, you know, slowing down the bond purchases, the tapering, if you will. Does it begin? Does this sway people?
Well, my feeling is that if monetary policy was stimulating the economy was not strong enough for them to taper. So they shouldn't taper. On the other hand, I think 3/4 of all the monetary easing goes into the financial markets, keeping interest rates down, sending stock prices up. So it doesn't help the real economy that much. So I think they recognize that now, and I think they're going to do some tapering because they think there's a certain futility in monetary easing, at least as far as the economy is concerned.
At some point, but do you think that begins in 2 weeks?
Look, they shouldn't do it.
I know.
The economy isn't strong enough.
Right.
But they feel it hasn't done as much good for the real economy, and they feel they've got to start tapering sometime, and now is as good as any.
You mentioned interest rates. This week, the 10-year yield hit 3%, above 3%. What does that mean? Is that a magic number, whereas people will say, if I can get 3% in fixed income, why would I put money in stocks? Is that going to create a sell-off?
I don't think so. Long term, the yield on the 10-year Treasury has been twice that level. But 3% is kind of a magic number. And I think the more important part of it is what it'll do to 30-year mortgage rates. And I think that it's already pushed them up 100 basis points, and that'll have some impact on housing. And housing was one of the favorable aspects of the U.S. economy.
Byron, you're not buying this recovery, this vibrancy of the recovery. What is it going to take to move the needle on this economy, you think?
Fiscal stimulus. You know, and
tax policy?
Yeah, well, tax policy is one of the things. In 2010, we had a $1.5 trillion budget deficit, and the economy was $15 trillion then. Today, we have a $17 trillion economy, and the budget deficit is $642. It's gone from 10% of GDP to 4%. We have room for some fiscal stimulus, and we're not doing it. There's no appetite in Congress to do it.
Unbelievable. All right, let's talk Federal Reserve and the new head. You know Larry Summers.
I do.
You've spent time with him. What do you think the issues would be if he were to become chairman? Do you think he's the guy, or is it Janet Yellen to take over for Bernanke?
Well, I think Obama, there are two people for sure who want Larry Summers. Larry Summers wants him, and so does Obama. The question is, he's going to have a little trouble getting confirmed, and it's a question of whether Obama wants the fight. Now, look at it from Obama's standpoint. He's got 3 fights ahead of him. Syria, a serious one. The debt ceiling, another one. And the confirmation of the new Fed chairman. I think of all those 3, the fight on the Fed chairman is the one he's most likely to abdicate on, and then he'd pick Janet Yellen.
So it sounds like you can go either way in your view.
Right.
Yeah. So as far as the markets are concerned, how do you advise investors with all of this uncertainty? I mean, will the nervousness just be unending?
Well, the market has done very well over the last 2 years. People have made a lot of money. I think there should be a reasonable amount of caution in everybody's portfolio mix.
All right, we'll leave it there. Byron, good to have you on the program.
Great to be here as always.
Thank you so much. Byron Reed joining us. Up next, on the money, the stakes in Syria are rising. A look at the cost and effectiveness of the White House's road ahead in the Middle East with President Clinton's Secretary of Defense, Bill Cohen, joining me. And then later, from hot wings to hot buns, I'll sit down with a former Hooters girl who's now in charge of one of today's hottest franchises, Cinnabon. As we take a break, take a look at how the stock market ended the week. We're back in 1 minute. Welcome back. The president is taking his case to Congress, asking lawmakers to support a limited attack on Syria as punishment for that government's reported chemical attack last month against its own people. It is an action that would clearly have an impact across the Middle East and the global community. William Cohen is a former senator and was Secretary of Defense in President Clinton's cabinet. Mr. Secretary, good to have you on the program. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good to be with you.
So members of Congress debating on the course of action in Syria. The nation will hear from the president on Tuesday next week. What do you think will happen?
Well, the president has to make a powerful and persuasive case because the American people, at least according to current polls, are very much overwhelmingly against it, I should say. And so he has an uphill battle here in terms of getting the members of the American people to call their elected officials and say, we've changed our mind, we support this. So it's going to be difficult. I think his principal goal right now, in addition to addressing the nation, is to convince the individual legislators that there's overwhelming evidence that Assad has used chemical weapons, that this is in violation of international law or norms, and that action must be taken. I think he also has an obligation to go to the United Nations. Even though President Putin, the Chinese, Xi Jinping, may veto any action, I think it's important that the president lay out what would be irrefutable evidence that this has been done by Assad and that the United Nations has to enforce its international rules or risk being dismissed as being futile to return to it in the future and being powerless and therefore irrelevant.
Do you think anything changed on Friday when the president of Russia, Putin, came out and Putin said, if the U.S. launches a military strike against Syria, I will defend and I will go with Syria?
The Russians have been supporting the Syrian government. They continue to do that. I think that the real issue is, would the Russians be willing to risk going to a Cold War with a country that is in the process of disintegrating? I doubt it. Nonetheless, they can be a force for great opposition. They can put in S-300 missiles, which would complicate any air attack should we ever launch one in the future.
How likely is it that Russia backs Syria and then others get involved? Iran backs Syria.
Well, they're doing it now. Iran is backing Syria. Iran has been the pipeline through which, Syria rather has been the pipeline through which Iran is funneling money and weapons into Hezbollah in Lebanon. So that isn't going to change. They might intensify their support. That's one of the calculations that hopefully our war planners are taking into account. What if? What happens after? What's the day after scenario that Iran either sends more fighters in, Hezbollah possibly considers launching rockets attack upon Israel, sending more fighters into the battlefield in Syria? All of these have to be taken into account.
So you were Secretary of Defense during President Clinton's strikes against Kosovo in the late 1990s. Can surgical strikes in Syria be as effective as those were?
I don't think so. I think it's very difficult when you're talking about Syria to talk about surgical strikes having that kind of an impact. Number one, when this notion of surgical strikes, it sounds very antiseptic, very clean, very bloodless. It's not bloodless. It kills not only combatants, it kills innocent people. And so you can expect Assad to be laying out all of the innocent people who've been killed by these strikes for all of the political propaganda that he'll derive out of that. Secondly, the strike that is contemplated, unlike the one that we launched in Kosovo, we were taking down Slobodan Milosevic over a 78-day period. President Obama is planning a very short, limited strike, which will have limited consequences.
Should President Obama have just gone it alone and not asked Congress for permission?
I think he should have consulted with Congress. The paradox here is if you go it alone very quickly, you're likely to have very few international supporters, which we don't have at this particular moment. If you wait too long, you're likely to have many more opponents. So it's one of those where you have to make a decision. If you're going to go, get as many supporters as you can, do it as quickly as you can, and then be accountable for it.
So Secretary of State John Kerry, Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel went to the Senate this week. Did they make the case for you in terms of the necessity and efficacy of limited airstrikes?
I would have problems if we're talking about just firing a shot across the bow. That, to me, does not make any sense. I think if we're going to degrade his capability, then that means we have to take out his airfields, his aircraft, something that will really punish him and degrade him and deter him from ever using the chemical weapons. We're not going to be striking chemical weapon sites. I would want to do enough damage so that this is a signal saying, don't ever think about using chemical weapons again. And by the way, we're also adding our support to the rebels, which we promised a year ago or 2 years ago, which we haven't complied with.
Now, in terms of the potential long-term cost, financially, personnel-wise, right. Secretary Hagel estimated limited strikes to cost tens of millions of dollars. But we know that a Tomahawk missile alone reportedly cost more than $1 million each.
Right.
In Libya, more than 200 of those were fired. So
right.
What's your expectation in terms of the cost of all of this?
I think you're looking at $200 million probably, and that's a low figure. That's just for the missiles. That would be the minimum, I would think, that we're looking at in terms of cost. And that runs into a bigger question. Here, the Congress has imposed a sequester, which is cutting the defense budget by significant amounts, just $45 billion in this past 5.5 months. And now we're going to add at least a quarter of $1 trillion to the debt. Or to force the Department of Defense to cut it out of other things. It will have to take it out of operation and maintenance. That means you will fly fewer aircraft, sail fewer ships, train fewer pilots, have fewer mechanics, et cetera, et cetera. So this doesn't come without a cost, and it's one that has to be recognized by the Congress and the country.
Mr. Secretary, great analysis. We appreciate your time tonight. Thanks so much.
Great to be with you. Former
Defense Secretary William Cohen joining us. Up next on The Money, yes, they are sticky and sweet, but Cinnabon is rolling in some serious dough. Find out how this billion-dollar bakery is raising its profile from food court treat to pantry staple. We'll meet the new head of the company. Welcome back. Tenacity, smarts, and a dash of luck has helped former Hooters girl Kat Cole soar to the C-suite by the age of 33. She's now president of the bakery franchise Cinnabon, overseeing 1,100 locations around the globe. Kat, it is good to have you on the program.
Thank you so much.
So you worked for Hooters for 16 years. You were a Hooters girl for how many years?
Just a couple of years.
Just a couple of years there. So how did you get your big break? You've obviously climbed the corporate ladder from Hooters waitress to president now of Cinnabon.
Yeah.
How'd you do it?
I was a little bit lucky that the company was growing and needed young talent. I worked very hard to prove myself, and there were killer women leaders in that company, which surprises most people, who gave me opportunities to take leadership roles when I was 18 and 19 years old. And I had a constant pursuit of education to try to make up for what I lacked in experience. I was a constant learner and student of the industry and the business.
Isn't that wonderful? So what did you learn at Hooters, you think, that actually helped you with your drive?
You know, so many things. The company was on a rocket ship where there were only about 3 countries outside of the United States that had Hooters when I started, and there were 33 when I left. And so just the experience of international expansion was a very unique opportunity.
So in a low-growth economy, Cinnabon is actually doing very well, thriving these past several years in comp store sales, franchise growth, company now approaching $1 billion in sales, and you're overseeing that. How are you still signing up new franchise partners and keeping current partners in the black?
So there are really only 2 things you can do to get franchise partners excited about growth. One is build the equity of the brand, which we do through our multi-channel growth and a killer team at Focus Brands International and Cinnabon that provides great support. And the other way is to have a laser focus on those franchise partners' profitability. So we have focused on building the value of the brand with a great team and drawing cost out of the operating system with the expertise of Focus Brands and great franchise partners.
In doing so, you've expanded into supermarkets, into other fast food chains through product licensing deals. One of your newest products is Cinnabon's K-Cups with Green Mountain Coffee Roasters.
Absolutely.
Is the Cinnabon's focus right now there or opening more stores? What's the priority?
Our growth strategy is multi-channel, so they both are priorities. The growth of stores is really about building the value of the brand. The reason people love Cinnabon is because they have that memory of the aroma with their family, shopping, traveling, and so the logo and the brand has meaning. That then creates demand and trial for new products and groceries.
Based on, your customers' spending habits, how would you characterize the economy right now?
You know, I think the consumer is definitely back, but I think the consumer is a bit different. They're looking for more value for their dollar. They're looking for higher quality for their discretionary calories, and certainly they're a little more skeptical of where they put their discretionary income.
Last week we saw protesters at Walmart. The fast food industry has taken a lot of heat about the low pay for workers. In nearly 60 cities, we saw demonstrations just last week fighting for an increase in their hourly wage, the right to form unions. Did Cinnabon workers take part in the strike first?
In some of our multi-unit venues, we had workers who did participate in the strike.
So you've worked on both sides, so you could actually really understand the plight on both sides. Are you for or against an increase in the minimum wage?
You know, it wasn't that long ago that I was making $2.13 an hour working as a Hooters girl, and so I definitely know what it's like to sort of schlep yourself around trying to pay the bills. And I am all for a fair wage, but I am not for such severe hikes that it would hamper growth of business and cause what's really fueling part of the meager growth in our economy, small businesses, to go out of business.
The healthcare legislation, how are you preparing your franchise partners to comply with the new healthcare law?
You know, it is really difficult to help prepare our franchise partners for the Affordable Care Act because no one truly knows the fine details, not even our government. So we share with them what information we can that's coming from the government. We're there for them as we look at how we'll have to evolve the labor model to support the increase in cost. And on a bigger scale, we just remind them, take good care of your people.
This Cinnabon is staring me in the face throughout our interview and is asking me to have it. This roll right here, 880 calories. One Cinnabon is 880 calories?
Yes, it is.
Is it worth it? I mean, we have, across the world right now, certainly in the United States, this effort to lose weight.
Yeah.
We're all aware of obesity. How are you changing Cinnabon to adapt to the public's changing taste?
You know, the key is first protect the quality. People still want to treat themselves. They want to indulge, but they're not going to do it with something that's not worth it. And so we still have the same recipe that we used 27 years ago. The second way is variety and choice. The mini bon, which is actually our second top seller, it only has 300 calories. So our focus is give people more choice so they can indulge the way that they want to in a way that's appropriate for their lifestyle. And when they're ready to go for the gusto, we've got the most delicious possible 880-calorie treat they could ever have.
And it smells absolutely delicious. Kat, great story. We love having you. Thanks so much. Kat Cole joining us. Up next, a look at the news this upcoming week that will have an impact on your money. And then the first facelift since the dawn of the internet era for Yahoo. Does a new look mean a new chapter for the business? Stay with us. Back in a moment. For more on our show and our guests, check out the website otm.cnbc.com. And I hope you'll follow me on Twitter and on Google+. Look for @Maria Bartiromo. First, I'll take a look at the stories coming up in the week ahead that may move the markets and impact your money this upcoming week. On Monday, technology titans like Marissa Mayer and Mark Zuckerberg, along with hundreds of startup entrepreneurs, will convene at the TechCrunch Disrupt conference in San Francisco. We'll see if any news comes out of that. Tuesday, Apple is expected to reveal the next generation iPhone at its company headquarters. Also on Thursday, Dell shareholders will vote on founder Michael Dell's raised offer of $13.75 a share and a special dividend of 13 cents. On Friday, the producer price index for the month of August is due out, and retail sales figures also on deck at the end of the week. Finally, a high-tech makeover. Yahoo unveiled a new logo this week, the first redesign in the company's 18-year history. The signature purple color stays, but the font and style was changed by a team headed by CEO Marissa Mayer. Not a detail was overlooked, apparently. Mayer wrote about the decision to retain Yahoo's exclamation point, now tilted at exactly 9 degrees. Quote, "Just to add a bit of whimsy," she said. Tell me what you think on email or on Facebook. Will a logo and tilt change impact the company's fortunes? That'll do it for us for today. Thanks so much for joining us. Next week, my guest, PIMCO's founder, Bill Gross, will talk interest rates and the implications as they move higher. Each week, keep it right here where we are on The Money. Have a great week, everybody. I'll see you again next weekend.